History and Culture podcasts are a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to PCN's History and Culture podcast. I'm Phil Beckman. This podcast series features interviews exploring Pennsylvania's rich history from the colonial era to industrialization, the Gettysburg Campaign to sports history, and from art to politics and more.
Today we'll be speaking with Carol Dunn. She is the Executive Director of the Wayne County Historical Society. Where is the Old Stone Jail and how old is it?
The Old Stone Jail we're talking about today is located on 10th Street in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, which is the county seat, Wayne County, Pennsylvania. We know that Pennsylvania is sort of a rectangle, and imagine the top right-hand corner of Pennsylvania. Wayne County is the extreme northeast county of Pennsylvania. So pretty much smack dab in the middle of Wayne County is Honesdale, and on 10th Street is the Old Stone Jail.
Well, take us to this jail. What would we see if we went to visit it today?
Well, it's in the middle today of the busy parking lot during daytime hours of the county courthouse. So as you approach the jail, you may not even notice it because it's surrounded by parked cars today and people scurrying back and forth from the area agency on aging to the courthouse and back and forth to the different buildings and so forth. But its most important feature, yes, it's sitting there quietly. It has a big white cupola about 6 foot high on the top of it and stone walls that are about 60 feet long and about 40 feet wide, the footprint of the building. You can't miss it, and yet life goes on around it, with people driving and parking and walking. And in the middle of it, staunchly stands the Old Stone Jail.
And you said it's made of stone. Obviously, it's called the Old Stone Jail. Were other jails in that area also made of stone?
Our research shows that prior jails, prior to the one that we're talking about today, which was started in 1858 and completed in 1859, that's before Lincoln became our president, so this is old, at least for our part of the county, for our part of the state. We do know that the prior jails were all made of wood, easily put up by local wood, lots of forests here in Wayne County, and easily taken down, wood used for something else. But this jail was much more, the dream here was to make a much more secure building that people could not escape from as easily, and to make it more robust. And they succeeded.
Could you talk about what are those design features that helped prevent escapes?
Well, in this building, the Old Stone Jail, when you enter, you go through a large metal door that has a key and is locked. And then you go into an anteroom, more or less, with the sheriff's office on the right of a long corridor, and probably the deputy sheriff or some sort of a helpful person on the left-hand side. And then another giant door would have been there, made of metal. Now, that door and many other pieces of metal were given during the metal drives in World War II to the metal drives. And they don't all exist anymore. They were taken down. Most of the interior cell doors and so forth were taken away at that time. We do have the big opening metal doors, which would have been there to keep the prisoners inside. And when we continue down this long center hallway, on either side, 4 cells on both sides, each cell being about 8 foot by 10 foot. The individual cells have a narrow window, about 8 inches wide, but about 6 feet long. We do know that at least one man, who was very small in build, escaped through this narrow window, but it prevented most people with a more robust body size from getting out. So the narrow slits of windows in the individual cells would have been a good way to keep people inside. The big robust door when you first entered the long corridor with the cells in it. And each one of the cells had a metal door on the corridor. And that metal door would have been closed. when they were served their meals, there was a little sliding space about waist high through which a simple plate or a bowl, could maybe something to drink, could have been passed. So lots of things to try to keep the miscreants inside the old stone jail.
Why was Wayne County chosen as the location for the jail?
Well, Wayne County needed a new jail. And so it was a county decision. It wasn't a decision on a higher level. This has nothing to do with state authorities. But the local people decided that they needed a better jail because the county seat had been moved around a little bit. This was a frontier. Wayne County was created in 1798. And at that time, it was much larger than it is today. Portions of it were lopped off to create parts of Monroe, to create Pike County. So we have the frontier here. The first jail in Bethany, which was made of wood, that jail, not strong enough and didn't last, was not going to work when they moved the county seat to Honesdale in 1841. So the reason that the jail was built in 1841, there was a wooden jail in Honesdale, and it was just a joke. People were escaping from it all the time and leaving. So at that point, we made plans to build a more robust jail, which starts in 1858 in its construction. So a local decision, and it was a controversial decision because the cost at that time, once the contract was let and the jail was actually built, was $16,000 in 1858, which, according to my research on the internet, would be equivalent to $600,000 today. And the people in the community, in the county, were very upset that something so big and so strong was being built with lots of extra things that really didn't need to be.
How big was the jail? I know you mentioned there's 4 cells. How large is this?
Well, it's about 60 foot long and about 40 feet wide, so that the portion of it where the actual inmates were is about 80% of that space. And there's 4 cells on the right-hand side of the corridor and 4 cells on the left-hand side of the corridor. So it's not a big presence in the parking lot today. And as I said, you can drive around it and not even notice that it's there if all you're wanting to do is get out of the courthouse area. But it's there and it's not going anywhere. There have been floods in Honesdale. We have 2 flood control projects now since the mid-1950s. So we have not had the serious kinds of floods that used to happen. But when the flooding did occur, the most recent one that destroyed property and drowned people was in 1942. The old stone jail stood. Other buildings are being swept away by the fast floodwaters from the nearby river, which is only about 50 feet from the jail. When the river waters rose, other buildings are being swept away, changed Honesdale in that area forever. Not the old stone jail. It stood. It got wet inside, but it stood.
Can you tell us how many people were in each cell, and were there only men or were there only women?
In each cell, there were 2 beds, space for 2 people. So it's pretty cramped, 8 feet wide, 10 feet long, with 2 people inside of there. There were men and women, but we have to say that most of the time, from our research, there's exclusively men in there. It's very unusual for a woman to become one of the inmates. But women they were in the same jail if they were arrested during the time that this jail stood and was used, 1859 to 1936. Women would have been put in the same jail. There was no differentiation.
What did a typical day inside of this jail look like for an inmate?
Well, we know that they were served 3 meals and that the sheriff's wife had that responsibility. And she was paid at the times that we learn most of our information about the old stone jail by reading reel-to-reel microfilms, which we have from the Wayne County early newspapers. And we know that the sheriff's wife was paid 50 cents per prisoner per day to provide 3 meals. So that would have been the focus of their day, I'm sure. They would have gotten a breakfast, a lunch, and a supper. they would have been allowed to leave the jail cells at some point on a day when the weather wasn't really easy, go outside into what I would call a yard. And there was a fence around the outside of the jail. There was a back door at the end of the long corridor from which the prisoners left, gone out into the yard with a set of steps, and had some fresh air. Now, exactly what they did when they were out there, some of them escaped. That was a routine thing. But they probably just chatted and passed the time away. So there was no, like we might find in today's prisons, there was no instructional time, there was no class time, there's no library, things that we might consider would make a person educate them or whatever. None of those things were available. Maybe they had their own reading material. We don't know much about any schedule. We've never seen a schedule, except for the fact that they were given 3 meals a day, and there was a yard that they could get to from the jail.
Are there any records or accounts that exist of actual stories of inmates that were there?
Yes, we do know the names of quite a few of the inmates, and we have stories once again from the newspapers. We go into our reel-to-reel microfilms and find things, old newspapers dating back to 1959 and so forth, and we know that there were dates, and we know the names of some people who were there. We do have some very specific people who were outstanding in the stories that were in the papers because of the crimes that they committed and the long trial and so forth. I'm just going to mention one person here whose name was James McCabe. Gotta find my paper. Yeah, he's probably the most celebrated person that was in the jail at any time. He was put into the jail in 1887 because he was accused of having committed murder on a road in Wayne County about 30 miles north. Wayne County is a long, skinny county, so about 30 miles north of Honesdale, which is where I'm sitting right now. Once he was sentenced to be hanged, found guilty by a court and so forth, and convicted, he escaped on May 26, 1887. He was at large in the county for about 4 months. There was a $500 reward on his head. He was then found in the haymow of a barn in one of the townships in the northern part of the county. And the sheriff, by the way, was really taken to task over all this because he and his deputies had allowed him to escape, really. He had taken the keys from a sleeping deputy in order to get out of this secure jail. They also think that perhaps there was some inside foolery going on. In other words, maybe someone gave him the keys. They weren't really sleeping, that kind of thing. We're not sure. But he was captured again, and he was hanged. It was one of 5 legitimate hangings. Not everybody believes in counties having this ability, and that ability was taken away from counties and from sheriffs in a county some point shortly after McCabe was hanged. But we have stories like that we can read about in the paper because we know that a large crowd gathered outside of the jail on the day that he was hanged, and that 70 invitations had been sent to high-ranking county officials on a small, almost like a credit card size invitation with a black border around the outside. We have a few of these that have been donated to the museum's archives. So we know that there was any place you could see from, rooftops, local hillsides, people crammed to watch this. This is the kind of thing that marked that 5th hanging and the last hanging in Wayne County. But I want to emphasize that these were not illegal bands of people who captured someone they didn't like and decided that they would hang that person. These were people who did have full access to the jury system, were convicted, and the judge decreed because of their crime that their life would end in hanging. 5 total, McCabe was the last one, but it wasn't easy because of him having escaped several times before he was actually hanged.
Do we know who was the first prisoner of the Old Stone Jail?
We don't know the name of the first prisoner. I would imagine, well, we know this, that when the wooden jail, the first jail, Holmesdale was named the county seat in 1841. The wooden jail was taken down prior to Old Stone Jail being built in the same footprint on the ground. And for a little while, then those prisoners had to be in the sheriff's house, which still stands, and it's right next door to the jail in the court complex. So, and the second floor of the sheriff's house is where the prisoners would have been for this time that they were building the jail for a year or so. And I'm sure they just sort of walked them over one day and said, okay, it's finished. Here you go. This is your new place that you're going to be locked up. So we don't know their names. There's a lot of information we don't have from the local newspapers. And there's no records that we can access at the courthouse where it lists all the different prisoners and so forth. Those things were either destroyed in one of the many floods, with the river being so close to the courthouse and to the jail. Our best source of information is those reel-to-reel microfilms of Wayne County newspapers from 150 some years ago.
Who was in charge of the jail?
The county sheriff, who would be an elected official, would have been elected by the citizens who were registered to vote. Of course, no women are voting at that time. Only men have the right to vote at that particular time. But the county sheriff would have been in charge of the jail. And as I said, his wife would have been in charge of feeding them. He would have had deputies. For a long portion of the time that this jail was standing, they would have done their duty on horseback, either with a horse pulling a cart or literally getting on a horse with a saddle and going to the different parts of the county where there was disturbance or a complaint. I can't even imagine what it was like to go 30 miles to try to catch someone in a barn loft in 1887. No phones, all the things that we consider that we would need today in order to know where an escaped prisoner might be. I don't know how they even got that guy, but the sheriff was in charge of all those kinds of things.
Do we know of another escape? I know you mentioned one earlier. Are there other ways that prisoners would escape?
Yes, before they built the Old Stone Jail, or even while it was standing, quite often they would go over the fence in the yard where they would be allowed to go out and get some fresh air. I'm not quite sure how they would distract the guard. Maybe the guard was not paying too much attention or taking a little break. They'd help one another, stand on one another's shoulders and escape over the fence. And we also know that in the Old Stone Jail itself, remember it has that 6-foot white cupola on the roof. And we know that at one point they get out of the locked area, prisoners, several of them, were sort of acrobatic in nature. They stack up the furniture from the cells in an area right by the sheriff's office. So that means they're out into the foyer area or the entrance area of the jail. They stack up furniture in that area, climb up, go into a spot in the ceiling where you can get into the attic. They didn't really use it as an attic. From there, they can get into the cupola, break through the cupola, and come down the 20 feet to the ground. And in one spot on the jail, there's even what looks like giant steps as part of the architectural design. So they only had to drop like 6 feet, then they'd walk a little, drop another 6 feet, and they got down to the ground, a 20-foot drop, without breaking any legs or anything. So if there was a way to get out, they figured it out.
How are these guards or keepers trained and paid?
We don't think that there was any formal training. We never see in our research, once again, we have to go back to the old newspapers. We never see any notice that the sheriff's deputies were going to be having an in-service or any sort of training. We don't believe that there was any required training before a person would be hired to be a sheriff's deputy. So probably it was someone who was willing to take the job. They might have advertised it in the local paper. The deputies would not have been elected. The sheriff would have been elected. But we don't see much formal training. I'm sure that there was on the site advice, like, when they go out in the yard, the prisoners can escape over the wall, and make sure you keep your keys in your pocket because they'll take them. I'm sure there was man-to-man advice, but there is no real record of that in the old museum.
Well, when does the Old Stone Jail close?
In 1935, 1936, that building area there, they closed the Old Stone Jail because right next to it, once again in that bustling parking lot, they built the next jail. And that jail is in effect until 2000, it's standing there until 2008, when Wayne County gets its modern present day jail. We have jail facilities today that are certainly up to par and exactly what you would expect in a county jail. So the next jail, which was built in 1936 and opened in 1936, that's when the Old Stone Jail is closed. Not taken down, probably because it's so incredibly robust in its structure and its architecture. We'll probably just say, like, oh, we'll take that down someday. We don't know how to take it. If it had been made of wood, it would have probably been dismantled in 1936. And then the other ironic thing is that the jail built in 1936, which closed in 2008, that jail's gone. So its parent jail is still there, but the 1936 jail is not. That's where the parking lot is.
How has the Old Stone Jail been preserved?
Well, that's interesting because it's just sat there and been flooded into and I would say sort of ignored. There was a group of Boy Scouts and their Boy Scout leader, whose name was Dick Kreitner, a well-known personality in Homestead. About 2001, 2002, the Boy Scouts with their leader, Dick Kreitner, decide that they are going to get permission from the county commissioners, go into the Old Stone Jail and start to clean it out. And then with additional help in the years 2003, 2004, along in there, from the county prison release workers, they're allowed to go out with a guard watching them and work during the day. Those workers continue to take things out because the Old Stone Jail next to the 1906 jail had become just sort of a catch-all storage space. If there was a carpentry project, they put the extra wood in the Old Stone Jail. Some road signs that you need in the winter, slippery when wet, or ice forms here, they stuck them in the Old Stone Jail. Flashing lights and things like that, they were put in the Old Stone Jail. So it had become pretty much a repository for things that were needed occasionally, for things that were left over from a project in the county complex. So starting about 2003, 2004, with the help from many different parts of the project, the Old Stone Jail was cleaned out. And that's the thing that allowed the beginning of the process. Since then, the Wayne County Historical Society and other groups in the community, with the permission of the commissioners who are so good in scheduling it to allow us to teach people history there, since then, we've had routine openings, open houses, all sorts of programs going on at the Old Stone Jail. It is a community site that, strangely enough, people love to go to and walk through, and just we're trying to preserve it.
Were there any restorations that were done to the jail?
Just the cleaning out mostly. I've had a couple of groups in the summer of local students who were being paid through a grant, and we've gone in with big brooms and shop vacs and swept the cobwebs down, taken away bits of like a cement coat that's on the stones on the inside, taken away piles of just stuff that's falling off the walls, and made it look nice and clean so that when people come in, it's like cleaning your own house. We've cleaned it a bit. I know that the commissioners are very concerned about what gets stored in it now and who's using it and making sure that it's locked appropriately. And, everyone's working together. It's not going to fall apart. It is built so soundly with 2.5-foot thick walls of stone. So nothing special is being done to preserve it, but everybody pitches in, all the different groups that use it. Greater Honesdale Partnership does. This time of year, they have Dale Tales, where you pay a little bit of money. It's a fundraiser for the nonprofit. Then you go in, and in front of each one of the cell walls, cell doors, you can stop, and someone will be recreating a person from the past to sort of scare you a little bit and, say some spooky things. And they also have a QR code tour that you can do in downtown Honesdale with your cell phone guiding you from one place to the next. And all those groups that are using the jail to have community events, fundraisers, us included at the Historical Society, we all pitch in to keep it clean.
What would you say the condition is like today compared to in its original state?
I think it's probably pretty much the same, except that these big metal doors are no longer hanging. But as far as the interior structure, there is places where this thick coat of concrete, mortar has fallen off. And we do know that there were plumbing here. Not too many people want to know about the plumbing inside a jail cell, but in the corner of each cell, there's a hole about 4 feet wide in the floor. And there probably was a little wooden seat on there so that was their toilet inside the cell. Well, the little toilets aren't there anymore. They're still in the ground. And we do know that in the far back right, the last cell on the right-hand side in the long corridor, that there probably was a shower. We have read that the prisoners were allowed to bathe or have a shower once a week. And the actual shower itself is not there. But we see a drain in the floor just in that one cell where it looks like, yes, there must have been a tub or a shower here. So those kinds of added features are no longer there. The furniture that we have in there now, including 2 small cots in most of the cells and some homemade mattresses with stuffed hay and some old ticking and so forth that me and others made on our sewing machines. Those things are recreations. Well, we do believe that they are very similar to what would have been in the jail.
For anybody watching that would like to come visit the Old Stone Jail, how would they do that?
The Wayne County Historical Society in Honesdale, as our main museum, we have a website, waynehistorypa.com. You can go there and see when the scheduled open houses are and contact us by phone. All that information is on our website. We're very glad to open the jail for groups, small or large groups, Boy Scout groups, Girl Scout groups, 4th grade groups, whoever, by special appointment. So the jail is available for people if they just contact us.
We've been speaking with Carol Dunn, the Executive Director of the Wayne County Historical Society. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PCN's history and culture content, like the interview you just heard, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Explore other documentary programs, event coverage, and a lot more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.